This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 333, triple three for those paying attention, Behat. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Behat with Chris Burgess. Chris cares about working open, sharing knowledge, and the power of open source as a community. His critical weakness is calendaring tools for us all. And he is a senior developer with Catalyst IT based in Dunedin, New Zealand. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey there.
How badly did I butcher the town name there? I told you that I was going to.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, Dunedin is how I say it.
Dunedin.
There you go.
Yeah.
It sounds way better. It sounds way better when you say it. Also joining us for her fourth week, maybe
Third, fourth
week. I've lost track.
Been here forever. It feels like. No.
Yeah. But in a good way. Abby is the web chief at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. Sorry, I added an extra and.
Don't forget them. Better
known as the ATF. And she's a co-organizer of Drupal GovCon. So Abby, welcome back. Glad to have you. And stay tuned, listener. She'll be talking about the game of the week as we've come accustomed to. But before we jump into that, I am John Picozzi. That is true. And joining me as usual is Nick Laughlin. Nick, what's going on with you?
Good morning, everybody. So as I mentioned a few episodes ago, I've been working on a project that has me interacting with WordPress a bit more than usual. And we're doing some pretty
everybody just shut the podcast off.
Shiver.
We're doing some pretty cool stuff with native web components and Storybook, but we need to integrate them with WordPress. And so part of what I was hired to do is to help integrate with all the different tools that this client uses. And they use Drupal, they use Silverstripe, but primarily they use WordPress. And so last week I had the pleasure of creating a sub-theme in WordPress. And I learned that in order to create a sub-theme in WordPress, you need to put comments in your style.css file to instantiate the theme. And if you don't have a comment in there with the name of the theme, then WordPress doesn't know that it's a theme. And I remember when annotations first started making their appearance in Drupal, and that felt weird that there were comments that got parsed. But not only these comments that get parsed, there are comments in a CSS file that are required. It's just,
CSS comments, those are like way down the chain. Who's reading those things, right?
Apparently WordPress.
The
WordPress theming engine is.
Do we feel like that's maybe a throwback to WordPress being more of a designy focused CMS?
I think it's more of something that they did originally because they thought it was easy, and because WordPress has just decided to be always backwards compatible, they just stuck to it. Now, it's still surprising to me that they haven't updated it to a separate file, like an info file or something, but there's been a lot of really confusing moments working in this project with WordPress, just why is it done that way? But this was the first one that really just kind of knocked my socks off with how bizarre it is. Like I said, I understand if they originally did it supporting it backwards compatible, but it's if you create a sub-theme today, this is the way that WordPress tells you to do it. And it's just mind-blowing.
So moving on from WordPress, we should actually compare notes at some point. I'm also working on a Storybook component-based project, not with WordPress, with Drupal and React. So I'd be interested to see or hear what your findings are in that space. A topic for another day. Moving right along, Abby, what's going on with you this week?
Yes. So perhaps even more horrifying than the WordPress theming.
Guys.
I joined a community organization, which is a lovely group of people, and they have a Wix site. And so I volunteered to take over maintaining it because there wasn't really anyone handling that. and it is a nightmare. And I'm at the point where I'm like, it is possibly going to be easier for me to just build them a new site in Drupal than try to get this Wix site to do what they want it to do, because they want members to be able to update their own contact info and all of this kind of these features that in Wix, it is just this tortuous process to try to get it to do anything. It is.
Sorry, remind me, Wix is an open source CMS, or are they paying
it
for
is
that?
No,
it is
it's
not
like a
open source.
Squarespace
Yeah, it's like,
thing.
okay.
Where you have to like drag things. So if you don't drag and center everything, things are like a little bit, it's like Dreamweaver, but in 2022. And I hate it.
Maybe try Squarespace first. I mean, I usually have pretty good luck with them.
That's not bad. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I've actually been using Wix for a couple. Like I've got a couple of those really older clients that are just like a plumber with 3 or 4 pages,
right?
And I've been moving them to Wix because I can't justify building a Drupal site for them. They have 3 pages and a contact page.
Next, Nick's going to tell us that he's moving to like some .NET based CMS development or something.
Absolutely not. But and these aren't sites that I'm maintaining. They're more like the clients that I've had for 10 years that I haven't done a single update for except for security updates. And so I'm just like, I'm no longer supporting them, and I'm moving them to an application that they can manage themselves.
Right.
So I've probably moved 3 or 4 clients to Wix, and it's funny. Like I said,
my default
they're not edit it, so they're happy.
My default in that situation is usually Squarespace. So
okay,
I don't know. To each his or her own, I suppose.
Right.
All right.
So that's my nightmare. And then fun update, game of the week. I picked up a game called Sable on the Steam sale that's going on right now. And it is, if anyone played the game Journey about 10 years ago, where you're this kind of little guy surfing on the sand through this fantasy future world.
Yeah.
So this game feels like a successor to that. And you're on a little motorbike going across the sand in this very like sci-fi world, but it's all, the graphics are this like cell shaded. It looks like you're in a comic book. The music and the graphics are absolutely incredible. The game is a little buggy. So I've definitely had a few points where I got stuck or like abandoned without my bike and had to trudge back through the sand to go find it again. But even with that, it's been a super fun and chill kind of pandemic winter game to play. So I do recommend it if you're looking for something kind of meditative and beautiful. I'm enjoying that a lot.
So how do you feel about buggy games? Because my son and I tend to play Major League Baseball on the Switch.
Yes.
And that game is buggy as hell. And
if I'm competing, I hate it.
Yeah.
But if it's a solo RPG type thing.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know.
It depends on how buggy.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I just feel like bugs, like, come on, test your games. Test your games.
I'm more forgiving if it's an indie game. Like this, I think is made by an extremely small team of people, like 1 or 2 people. So those kind of works of love I'm fine with. But yeah, a big studio game like NLB, you got to test your code.
Right. Totally off topic, but Germany's calling me right now, the whole country. So moving right along. Chris, what's going on with you this week?
So I'm just back to work yesterday after a bit of a summer break. Been camping. It's been really nice, relaxing, and a lot of time in the hammock, a little bit of time contemplating a new role that I've got at the end of last year and starting shortly, like once we've got a thing out the door. Which is a role of open source advocate within Catalyst, and the company's really founded in open source, so this is pretty exciting, kind of a step outside just the developer and client facing roles to something organizational. But yeah, it's summertime, and I'm this week trying to get back in the swing of actually working every day. Yeah.
That's awesome. So open source advocacy sounds awesome, and having a role based on that sounds awesome. So summer also sounds awesome. So everything's awesome in New Zealand right now, it sounds like. The world is complicated these days, but things are going pretty well in my corner of it. There you go. That's awesome. That is
Yeah.
great. So, piggybacking on my update from last week, I actually finished the Squid Games, and let me tell you, it's something to finish. I am still very much kind of like WTF, but really hoping they do a season 2 and looking forward to see what comes of that. In other news, we like to do weather updates on this show quite frequently. Where I live and where Steven's not so far away from me, and we actually, I think, may have gotten more snow than Nick for once in a snowstorm. I had about 20 to 24 inches of snow, depending on the drifts got up to, say, maybe 30 inches. But yeah, so that was fun. Saturday, it was an official blizzard, which for those of you that may not know, blizzards are not snow total based. They're wind based and visibility based. So yeah, it was fun. We kind of hung out in the house and went out and played in the snow and had a good time.
I do have to say, one thing that was really funny about this storm was I gave Kitako a walk later that day, and pretty much everybody had cleared their sidewalks. Like, Worcester's pretty strict about its snow clearing rules. But there was one house behind us that they hadn't cleaned their sidewalk yet, and it had actually drifted a little bit. So it was deeper than I realized when I started walking through it, because I have some big boots and stuff. So I was just like plowing through it, and Kitako doesn't really mind the snow too much. He loves snow, but he doesn't like when the snow touches his belly. So it was deep enough that it was touching his belly. And normally when that happens, he just like jumps in it. And it was, most places was shallow enough that he just like jump a little bit and he'd be fine. But this, it was so like, it was deep for a really long stretch. So he kept jumping, trying to like get to the next spot. But it was so deep that I couldn't walk fast enough to let him jump out of it. So he was just like hopping like a rabbit almost in place as I trudged through it for like, I don't know, like a 30-foot stretch. I felt
Poor
so
buddy.
bad for him. He was so tired, but it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. He was just like a rabbit, just like hop, 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 hop.
I kind of had that same same instance with one of my kids. Like he jumped into one of the snowbanks, and it was like literally up to his like waist, and he's just like looking at me like, I didn't think it was that deep, and I'm like. Like, you there now, try to dig yourself out, kid. Alrighty, listeners, we have a promo from our friends on the community working group. Mike Anello is here to tell us about nominations being open for the Aaron Windborn Award. Mike, tell us all about it.
Hey now, this is Mike Anello from the Drupal community working group. I've been a longtime member of the Drupal community, username Ultimike. You may have heard me on this very podcast in the past, but I'm here to tell you about the 2022 Aaron Windborn Award nominations, which are now open. So we are looking for nominations from the Drupal community for folks who, quote, demonstrate personal integrity, kindness, and above and beyond commitment to the Drupal community. Each year at DrupalCon North America, we are lucky enough to award this to an individual who demonstrates those qualities, and we are looking for the next winner of the Aaron Windborn Award. So nominations are open until Friday, March 25th of this year, 2022, and the winner, of course, will be announced at DrupalCon North America. So if you know someone who is worthy of this award or just worthy of being nominated, please let us know. I have a nice short link for you. You can go to bit.ly, so that's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/AWA 2022. AWA for Aaron Windborn Award and the year 2022. Once again, bit.ly/AWA 2022. Look forward to seeing your nominations. And thank you very much, Talking Drupal folks.
Mike, thanks for that. Thanks for that update. And you should definitely go and nominate your friends and all those people that have helped to improve Drupal in your life. So let's move on to our module of the week. Nick, tell us a little bit about SVG Image.
Yeah, SVG Image is one of those nice utility modules that I kind of just install on almost every project and forget about it. It allows you to upload SVG files with SVG extensions in image fields. You still have to enable it. I think the only configuration you have to do after you install it is allowing that extension in the image field. So when you edit the settings of an image field, you can specify which extensions are acceptable, in the whitelist, and you have to add SVG. But other than that, it kind of just works. I've never had any issues with it. And, I think it's one of those modules that I feel like at this point, for Drupal 10, maybe it kind of should maybe make its way into core, into the image module, because, SVGs are pretty prevalent at this point.
Right.
But yeah, it's if you're looking to add SVGs to your site in image fields, then this is the way to do it for sure.
I was just checking it out, and because it sounds like something we would like to use on our site, but it does look like there is a current issue playing nicely with media. So that's something to be aware of, but it looks like it's an active issue that they are working on.
Open source.
I didn't realize it doesn't
constantly working. Well, no, it's an active issue.
I think it used to, and then it stopped working maybe with a recent update, and they're working on it.
That might be I have to look into that. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah.
I'm literally migrating stuff from image fields to media.
Makes me wonder if we should do a show on image formats with SVG and WebP,
yes.
Right?
I have a really good book to recommend. The what is it called? A Book Apart has a really nice, very small but really meaty book on image optimization that we've been using as our guide.
Absolutely.
Is anybody using WebP? Sorry, we're going to go down this rabbit hole for a second.
I have. I do use it for one project.
Interesting.
I mean, it's way more performant.
Sure.
But you have to have a lot of fallbacks because it doesn't work everywhere. So.
Right. All right. Here it is. We've reached our. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just interested. Is there like a path with SVG Image to make the module redundant and get it into core? Is that something that seems like it's on the project's radar?
I do not know. I haven't looked into it.
Feels like one of those important image formats, though, right? That like needs to be in core, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think the problem is that there's a lot of utility modules like that should, in an ideal world would all be in core, but it takes, like you said, Chris, it takes somebody behind the initiative, somebody needs to push it. And, the SVG image module has maintainers and it's fantastic. Yeah. So, maybe there isn't a need for it to be in core because it works so well as a
wonder what
module.
The use case is, right? Are a lot of people using SVGs? I mean, I know that a lot of people do use them, but I wonder, like, from a core standpoint, like it's not something that every site needs, right? It's probably a pretty specific use case right now.
No, so I guess my thinking is that the what the existence of the module probably tells us is that somewhere in core there's a list that says JPEG, GIF, PNG, right? And that probably could be a configurable thing if it's not already. Yeah, and I wonder what the other considerations are, because there will be.
Well, I think the main thing is that, like, GIF, JPEG, and PNG can just be put into an image tag, whereas SVGs are an HTML tag themselves that are wrappers that can contain, whatever media that they want to. That's probably what it is.
I'm not going to lie, you just blew my mind with that. I actually didn't realize that an SVG was a different HTML tag.
It can be both. Is that right? Because I'm pretty sure you can.
I think you can embed it. Yeah, you can put it in as an image tag, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay.
But the code exists. Like, you have to save the SVG, right? It's editable code.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure that you can include that as a source because it's not a file. It's a tag. So I'll have to look that up. And
an SVG, like an image, is an SVG file. So like you are including that. And that file has, code inside of it to figure out how to display that image, right?
Yeah, which is what
Can I divert us
really
even
about.
further?
Oh man, if you've ever listened, we love rabbit holes, so feel free, go down all
Okay,
of them.
so I'm working on a migration project at the moment, and in order to better communicate the migrations to customer and other developers, I got it in my head that I should make charts of the migrations, and the rabbit holing. This wound up with me writing a module that tries to comprehend the layout of a migration with like source, destination, process plugins, and the pipelines involved. And then turning that first into mermaid charts. But then I was like, no, this is actually, I'm dealing with a graph here. So I should use clue/graph PHP and GraphViz. And it's generating, this is how I've figured out that you can image SRC an SVG because it's currently like printing out quite kooky charts. And if you mess up your graph plotting, then they just look completely insane.
I feel like UML would be. I feel like UML would be the way to graph that, because UML is made for like code defined.
Yeah. Okay. So my intent is that it will be able, because we work with GitLab a lot. I want to be able to output mermaid charts, and I'm conscious that I shouldn't lock it into a particular one. So it will end up being that you can use multiple output formats, and in its current sandbox state, it spits out like a mermaid chart, and above that a GraphViz chart on the same page, because I'm just trying to like track both of them. And I think I posted a tweet last week with some of the crazy charts that it was producing for a given simple sample migration.
It's interesting. It's interesting how work tends to overlap, because I'm working on a project right now with charts, and I'm actually doing the reverse, where for the first phase, we're not going to do a JS library, or like, we're just going to allow SVGs and like upload the charts as SVGs and like call it a day for right now. So,
right.
I'd love to see those plugins. Is that module going to be released at some point? Because
absolutely. It's a sandbox at the moment, and I'm just trying to see if I can drop it in the
do that in the show notes.
That sounds super useful, because right now I'm doing, you can get that giant spreadsheet of fields out of D7, right? And so all of our whole team's trying to kind of like screen share and all look at this together and decide on labels and all this stuff for D9. And it is like, I need a magnifying glass. It would be so much nicer to have a nice visualization mermaid chart.
Those migrations can get wall size, right?
Yes.
Gonna blow your mind. Control Plus does great things.
I'll find the sandbox link as well. Sure.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
So let's move into our primary topic, and it's a big one. So we're gonna spend some time talking about it. But first and foremost, Chris, what is Behat?
Behat's a software tool and a communication tool. It's a tool for testing, and you can test Drupal sites with it, but you can test other things too. You can mostly test web applications, but you can test other things. And it's intended to support communication between the people writing the tests and writing the software and the other stakeholders, so customer or QA. It does that by allowing you to write your tests in a plain looking language. It's a DSL that's written in your native tongue. So for me, that's English. And that can give a really clear means to communicate with that wider team. It's written in PHP, and that means that it's got great integration or possibilities with applications like Drupal, because alongside of this plain language description of what behavior you expect, you can deliver, you can implement pretty much as detailed as you like under the hoodness.
You just use an acronym, and DSL. What does that stand for?
Domain specific language. What that means is that there is you can write yourself a block of code. It reads like English, it follows a given format, and that allows it to be parsed by a parser like Behat's. I guess UML is another that you mentioned before, Nick, is probably a DSL for drawing images. And so a Behat feature might look like, or it might read like, given I'm logged in as a user, when I'm on my user profile, and I fill in email with 123, and I press save, then I should see 123 is not a valid email. I don't know if that's the exact wording of the error message that you'd see, but I think most of the listeners would understand what happened when that test was run, and whether or not they understood like the specifics, whether they're a technical stakeholder or not, they should be able to understand this is an email validation process that we're testing here, and I can reproduce that by following the steps that have been written out. But also the test can do that in like 2 seconds for me, multiple times a day. And when someone tries to land some code to make sure that functionality is still working.
So how does Behat work under the hood? Because I've used Behat in the past, and I remember when I was first getting started, that description you just gave is pretty exciting, pretty easy to understand, but going from writing your own test to writing like custom tests, there's a bit of a leap there. So how does Behat take that natural language or that DSL and then convert that into something that it's actually doing?
Sure. So Behat's, when you've added Behat to a project, you've imported a driver of some kind, which lets it talk to a browser of some kind. And you've imported the Behat library and Mink, which is a kind of a browser interface. And Behat is going to read some files, some .feature files that contain tests like that, and also some other files, context definitions and other inclusions, let's say, or extensions, and read comments. So back to our mention of annotations before, it'll look for comments that start with, say, @given, and then have a statement after them. And it'll pass those as, okay, this statement form maps to this function. When I see this statement form, I'll execute the function, possibly with some arguments that have been included in the statement. So and I fill in email with 123. It's got 2 arguments to it. One is the label or the ID or the class or the other things, the identifiers of the email input, and one is the value that's going to get filled into that input. So somewhere there'll be, I think it's in the Mink definitions, there'll be a function fill field that maps to that statement, and those all get put together by some form of magic to allow you to write those feature files.
I think there's 2 parts to the answer. One is there's a whole bunch of stuff that's Drupal specific where these tests are already pre-written, so you don't have to worry about them. So the example that you gave, given that I am a user on my user profile page, I fill in the email form with 123. That's all like standard. That's already written in the Drupal Behat library. So that should work pretty much out of the box, I think.
Yes and no. One of those, so you're right, I glossed over the fact that there are Drupal specific definitions and there are generic like web form definitions. So I fill an email with 123, it can comprehend any web form on the internet, like the front page of a search engine or your Drupal site. Given I'm logged in as a user, that comes from the Drupal extension for Behat, and it knows through your Behat configuration, like the base URL of your site and whether you're looking at a Drupal 7 or Drupal 9 site, and those things, and we'll go in and actually do a whole lot of work in the background. It'll create a temporary user, log you in as that person, or log the browser in as that person, put you on the page that you said to land on, and then when the test completes, it'll delete that user as well, and probably some other magic bits. But yeah, so sorry. Yeah,
that's fine. And then the second part is that, like you said, you're basically mapping certain statements to functions, and because they're functions, they have parameters that you're feeding into it. So I think for me, the revelation was that if you hit something that doesn't exist, then you have to create that function. You have to determine what parameters need to be passed in, and then it's a matter of figuring out how to properly use Behat to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But one of the really big question marks I remember when I first started using Behat, and this was several years ago, was that almost all the documentation is around, and maybe it's changed in the last few years, but most of the documentation at the time was around, you can write natural language tests and it just works. And then, but the second you write a new test, it doesn't just work. You have to actually write the PHP to run the test. And and that's kind of something that you have to keep in mind when you're writing something that isn't using something that Drupal already kind of has out of the box. And you do have to actually write the actual test yourself.
But there's there's a reusability component there too that's great, right?
Absolutely.
So like, and I don't want to bury the lead on that. Like I agree with Nick, like let's not say like, hey, natural language and like it's just going to work, right?
Yeah.
But like there's also the fact that like you don't have to write that. You can say, hey, I logged in, right? Check that I logged into the site. And then I went to this page and did this thing, or I went to this other page and did this other thing. And like that login piece is already written. So like, hey, we can reuse that 25 times.
Stuff.
Yep. 25 times.
A lot of the building blocks are there. And,
right.
And in fact, we're kind of going a little bit off the trail right now, but I'm curious, Chris, how often you find you have to write custom test functions versus just using something that's already built into either Behat or the Drupal Behat library?
Sure. I am trying to think of there is definitely a small library of common test functions that I'll introduce to just about every project's feature context, which is kind of the grab bag. One of those is like a break function for debugging tests, and there's a couple of others, but my process is usually to try and upstream it. Like if I'm working with media and there's a library or an extension that has some media support already, I'll try and submit that like up as a pull request, and then I'll patch it into my local code base. And so ideally they'll land upstream. And I think somehow I ended up maintaining one of the drivers, or whatever I don't know if it's maintainer, some other role. Wow, my summer break is really kicking me right now, because I know that I've written some on the project that I'm working on right now, and I can't place most of them. It's a necessary step, and I will do it where it is going to improve the test, I think, is my current position. Like a lot of things you could reproduce by stepping through the admin form to set up, say, a media image with a description. But it might make more sense for the test's readability to turn those several clicks into a single background step that happens internally to Drupal, provided you're not testing those interface steps. So if you want to test the display of a chart, then you shouldn't be testing in the same test the setup of the chart. That's a different test scenario. And I will bundle common steps like that, or then I check out using a credit card. That doesn't need to be a whole set of 10 different interactions and
Right.
can be bundled as a single step. So those are some of the custom things that I might end up writing. I guess it's more focused now around how well the test can communicate, where when I first got started with Behat, you're right, there's a lot of things that were confusing or sufficiently magic that I didn't comprehend what was going on under the hood. And I used a lot of custom step definitions at that point to try and work around like what the heck's going on, why does this step behave differently to that one? And one of the gotchas in the DSL that took me a long time to recognize, for example, I think it's in the Drupal extension, there's an after step. So you can, as well as those annotations for like given, you can introduce an after step, say, function. It'll run after every step. And one of them there looks for whether the previous step contained like press, click, some other, JavaScript interactions. And then it waits for Drupal's jQuery to finish doing all of its animations and things. And I couldn't work out for a while why some steps seemed to wait for JavaScript and others didn't. And it was the, presence of particular words matched by a regex in that step's annotation, step definition, whatever. So yeah, there's some under the hood magic going on that can take a while to get your head around. A really big help was discovering that my editor comprehended Behat syntax so that I could see whether any step def I had written was valid because it looks different in the editor, and I can click through to the step definition, which will be executed. That I know that's a feature of PHP Storm. I'm sure it's a feature of other editors, but it makes a huge difference to how comprehensible the whole toolkit becomes when you have that ability to see.
Right. So just rewinding real quick back to, I know you were talking about keeping display testing, separate from the functionality testing. And I know at ATF, actually in the past couple sprints, we've been at the start of implementing Behat. We do extensive user acceptance testing, So very pretty much the same test, but just writing them out and having a human follow it. And so we're now translating those into Behat, getting those into our different environments. And I know for us, managing expectations was a big piece of understanding Behat, especially on the content admin side of what can it do and what can't it do. So you've talked a lot about what it can do. What would you say are some examples of what it cannot do or not do well?
Sure. So it's not a low-level testing tool for unit testing, and it's not suitable for performance or load testing. You can certainly simulate some sufficient interactions to annoy a server if you want to. It's best suited for testing predictable systems with known inputs, and the more complicated what's going on screen, so the more JavaScript interactions there are, the less predictable the timings and things become. And you might find yourself say, why does this step work half the time or a third of the time? And a common pattern I see is people introducing sleep. So then I wait 2 seconds, then I click the next button, which probably indicates that the previous step hasn't fully accounted for the, whatever JavaScript or other server-side interactions are happening. We have seen it get long test runs can start to become less predictable, I think is how I'd describe it. And I'm not certain yet whether that is the system under extensive test, which typically is like for us anyway, is a temporary environment running in CI with, so a little harder to inspect than a development server that you might go and pull things out of after the fact. Another limitation of Behat is that because it's a DSL, you haven't got access to some variable information such as, you can, but you don't know that it's Monday when you're writing the step definition. So you trying to articulate how this makes sense. There's one site that I test which has a calendar on screen. You don't always know that this week has a Monday or a Sunday, and if you're testing, especially if you're only considering this calendar month, you don't know that there's a Monday or a Sunday. And therefore, if you need to test that a discount will work on Sundays, you have to find a way of expressing to Behat when there will be a calendar month in scope that has the days you need.
Right.
And so that language starts to become it feels like a limitation at first, but I kind of believe in getting to know how your tools work sufficiently that that those limitations, you understand them, and you know that's like the car just doesn't move sideways, and that's actually a feature.
Right.
So stop wanting it to do the other thing.
So just digging into that a little bit, because I'm interested, does it have a basic understanding as far as like today, tomorrow, yesterday? Or is that something where like you have to kind of code that into the test?
Sure. So you can definitely write a test that says, then I click tomorrow in the calendar, and you could approach that however you liked, because you probably control both the source of the calendar. So you could introduce a class for tomorrow, or the browser, so you can identify with JavaScript or through PHP what the date will be tomorrow and find the date on the calendar. So you've got under the hood of those statements, you've got a full PHP stack, and if you're using a JavaScript enabled browser, you have JavaScript as well to work with. But in the step definition, like it helps to recognize that that steps doesn't have the local scope to say Sunday and know what Sunday is going to look like necessarily.
Right.
I feel like I'm not expressing it very well, but there's just that variability that
it's making them general enough to be effective, as opposed to like, hey, go to like Sunday September whatever it is, and make sure that you can select that, right? So,
and probably for a scenario that involves a lot of, if you're finding yourself writing a ton of really complex logic, I imagine in a Behat test, maybe that's a human test, right? Stretching it, you probably could code it to do it, but should you isn't the question.
If you're customizing the tool more than 90%, maybe that's not the right tool.
The right tool. Yes.
So you talked a little bit about CI/CD and development environments, and I'm wondering where in the development cycle is Behat used? Is it a local tool? Is it a dev environment tool? I've even seen instances where like it's in the CI/CD process. Like in your mind, where should that live?
So definitely CI/CD for us, but that was probably the last place that it got to, because it needed to be a useful local and development environment tool first. Probably I started using it because I am very easily distracted, and I just zone out if I have to click my way through the same form process repeatedly. And so I looked for tools that would allow me to focus on development while the tool took care of setting up the requirements to process the form. And you can run Behat connected to a local browser, so you can actually have it as a Chrome window, and you just hit up arrow enter in your command line, and it'll play through the browser steps and leave you at the last thing. And if you've got the browser on screen, you can then take over and follow the next couple of steps and go, okay, so the label is this, add it to my step definitions, and repeat. We use it as I said before, I think it's a communication tool as well. So we use it to communicate between developers, what the steps are to to follow a process, to set up a particular piece of content or demonstrate something. So it provides that bridging, and it's useful to talk to stakeholders. So that's kind of outside of a development environment, I guess, and often GitLab somewhere. It's nice. It's really nice that it's quite readable.
Right.
Although I don't think all the stakeholders are reading all the pull requests, but yeah.
So I know our devs are also working on basically a cron job suite of Behat tests we have certain subdomains, like an edit subdomain, that we don't want access to outside our government agency network, right? So the thought was, right, we do have stats on various different, on the cloud host, but we would like the Behat test to run on a cron job and just check to make sure people who don't have the right access cannot get to it, right? Coming from, So is that something that you guys have worked on too, that type of run on a recurring cron basis?
Yeah, so I've played with that, and that becomes a little bit more like monitoring and a little bit less like testing. I mean, you're certainly testing, but it's monitoring the behavior of the system too, because it's happening on a schedule. Right. Certainly you can do that, and I mean, you can use Behat for automation, and it's excellent for testing, and it can be used for monitoring, and you could derive timings from that and note that your service was slow at certain times during the day, where if you were just monitoring it with a standard Isinga check, that might not show up because the points you monitored might be pre-cached, but the forms might be slightly slower. You definitely can do that. You can run it against a development environment, like a long-lived development environment, to revalidate expectations, or just make sure that say a customer applying configuration in the database hasn't interfered with any of the site's systems, and you can direct it at a production environment too for that sort of monitoring and validation. But you do have to consider that if your Behat tests make changes or create test users or whatever.
On prod,
So for a prod environment, you probably want to be a lot more cautious about the fact that there's going to be a test, or there might end up being a test account that has a test password living in a configuration somewhere that for government sites probably isn't appropriate.
Right.
Or for lots of sites, as government, other people can have security too.
Yeah.
Yes, that's for sure. So I just wanted to mention too that we've mentioned a couple of times the domain-specific language for Behat. It's actually called Gherkin, like the pickle. So if you are kind of just getting started in the Behat journey and you want to learn more about what types of things are possible, you definitely want to look up Gherkin. But I had a few questions for you, Chris, about if somebody's sitting down, they're thinking about starting to use Behat and they're getting ready to write their first test. I've got 3 questions for you. The first question is, do you have any tips on writing a good test?
Yeah, it definitely took me a long time to recognize that there is more to so the given, when, then, and are the start word for each step definition. And initially I was like, I'll just compose it like an English sentence, and I didn't really think beyond that. But in Cucumber or Gherkin, they're members of the same family. I think Cucumber is the broader family of languages, sorry. They have specific meanings in the QA field. And so the given statement, so you might go, given I have a car and I have some keys, those are the setup. You're not intended to be testing something in that phase. The when describes the event, and then the then describes the things that you're actually validating. And getting your head around that composition and structure can start to make the tests clearer to others reading them, to understand what's actually supposed to be being tested here. So if your first statement is given I'm logged in as an administrator, we're actually not testing that right now. Like the test will fail if you can't log in, which is really useful feedback. but that test isn't about testing that you can log in. The test is about testing what happens in the when and the then phase. Yeah, that was really helpful. There's definitely other kind of nuances of the testing stuff that took me a while to pick up, for sure.
So if, another kind of aspect of this, I'm sure there's a lot of false starts that you've had. Do you have any common mistakes that people should avoid, other than kind of putting the test in the given part of the state?
Yeah. Long and complicated tests, not trusting the tests. Like if you start to see them fail, kind of, I think it's really useful to dig into that rather than go, the tests just don't work. The details around the that subtlety of JavaScript background stuff happening, that was really useful. So it really helps, especially at first, to be able to connect to a visible browser and observe what's happening. That will probably clarify things when you're like, why is that? Why does it not behave as expected? And another really useful tool for that is a screenshot capturer. So there's an extension or there's a couple actually, which on failures, or when you include a step that says, then I save screenshot, it'll capture the page HTML and a PNG of the page state as it currently is. And that's super useful to understand, like, my expectations weren't met, the test's expectations weren't met, what was going on here. Look, you can actually see these things and understand them. So yeah, I guess getting to know the tool really, really helps. And that can take some time. I think also familiarity adds to that. And for that purpose, trying to write a generic set of tests, which I think John alluded to earlier. There are some that are just like, I can log into Drupal and I can visit the front page and it's not a 404. And when I execute drush role list, I can see these roles. Those are really useful tests to include in every site, so that you've got that confidence that I know that same set of basic tests run across all 10 sites in this family.
Yeah.
When one of them stops behaving, that gives you a lot more confidence that it's not just, those cookie tests, they're weird, but actually something's going on here.
The canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
And your point about screenshots, real quick too, because I know we were also looking at visual regression testing, but you're kind of limited to just what the page looks like when it loads. So if you want to test like an interactive view or anything that involve, or like an error message, if you mistype something in a field, that sounds like a perfect way to consistently put in the same inputs, get the same screenshot each time, but then start comparing pixel to pixel to make sure things aren't shifting or looking different.
Yeah, I haven't wired it up yet, but my intent on a set of migration projects we're working on currently is to capture screenshots of given pages after the migrations have run. So currently the CI's, has a Behat test, which works from a pre-built database, and it has a migrate test that validates the migrations run. If I chain those together, then I'll be able to say, does the news section have the expected articles, and spit out a screenshot for the stakeholders to look at. So they don't need to go and log in to an environment. I guess they have to log in to GitLab, but there's kind of that capturing of the ongoing information, and you can see if things start misbehaving or
Right.
There's also if you what's needed for that. There's a patch, I think, to the screenshot extension that we're using, which allows you to resize the screen. And so then you can say, visit this page, resize to this, take a screenshot, resize to this, take a screenshot. And that's nice to grab out of Behat as well. So you can,
test responsiveness.
Yeah, it sounds super useful.
But to be clear, there is no comparison tool in Behat, right? So you couldn't compare two screenshots.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And in order to compare a screenshot, you'd have to be able to fetch the image from the previous run, where we're using it in CI, and those are, you could save the artifacts and then pass them on to a later run, or a reference set of images. But yeah, we're not using visual regression testing, no.
Got it.
So the last question that I have in this kind of section is, you'd mentioned this in Common Mistakes to Avoid, but I'm curious what your recommendations on like the number of steps that an individual test should have, or how long an individual step can be before you really should start thinking like, hey, I need to maybe write a custom test or a custom step, or I need to really rethink this process. Is there kind of like a limit? You see something with this many steps in a row, you're like, that should be broken out into a couple different tests or something.
Certainly when they get longer, they feel less predictable. I don't have a number in my head about how many lines, but it feels like, can you see the function on screen all at once? Or perhaps because this is a language made to be read, if you can't read that sentence without taking a breath, maybe take a breath and break it down a bit. But it depends, because the one I mentioned before that does the resizing, I think it's quite a long one now because it just repeats itself, and repetition in that case probably isn't as much of a concern as in other cases. So really depends.
Okay.
So I can see over time the number of tests getting higher and higher and higher as a team uses this.
Yes.
So what are your tips for organizing these tests and wrangling them as they get pile up?
Because you can end up with a lot. We have test suites that approach an hour's worth of testing runtime. That's in a CI environment, so it's a kind of, I'd consider it to be a smaller site environment, but it's doing a whole lot of testing. Like if you tried to get a QA person to do that same workload, tips for organizing the tests, both the features, which is the file at the file level, and then the scenarios, which is at the individual test level. The two organizational levels, you can tag them and you can run them targeted with tags. So you go Behat -- tag equals, and then you can use some more complicated syntax to include or exclude sets of tags. Typically, when I'm working on a feature, then I will be running the tests tagged for that feature, and I get a bit nerdy, and I'll tag them at requirement 180.b, and I'll tag them at user login so that I can quickly bring up whichever level of specificity works for what I need to do right now.
Okay.
And then, so your CI system, or in the background while you're off grabbing a coffee, you might run the full suite to confirm that everything else didn't break too. But while you're developing a particular feature or just doing one process, you can zoom in and only run the tests that you really care about while you're doing that. You can organize them at file levels as well, and I tend to I'll match a feature level tag with the file name, basically, just so I don't have to remember that there's an underscore here and a hat and a dash here. Another detail that comes to mind with the tagging is that some tags have effects or have affect how the test runs. So there's an @JavaScript tag which will tell Behat, hey, for this test, use a JavaScript enabled driver, so it'll connect to Chrome or Selenium. But you can then leave the @JavaScript tag out of a whole lot of your tests, they'll run far faster because your tested environment isn't serving images to a fake browser. It's just talking to a PHP browser. Goot, or there's another one that is like the new Symfony browser replacement. I forget the name of. And that's way faster. That verifies that the site works with JavaScript disabled, which probably isn't as much of a consideration these days, but it's still really useful to know that it works under the hood. And you've got JavaScript available when you need it to. But you could write a test suite that never uses JavaScript and omit the need for a browser, or a proper browser, desktop browser. Yeah.
So bringing this back to Drupal to kind of come towards the end of the show here, right? So you mentioned that there is a library of kind of like Drupal functions that you can bring in, right, and you can use in your steps for your tests and whatnot. Like how, I guess I'm wondering, like, how far does that get you? Like if I'm I know enough PHP to be dangerous, right? I want to start using Behat. If I grab this library and I drop it on my site, how far am I going to be able to get with that before I have to start thinking about like writing, custom functions or custom stories, or not stories, but steps to basically get where I need to be?
Okay, so probably three components to keep in mind there. There's excuse me. There's Drupal driver and Drupal extension. Drupal driver provides you the connectivity to the underlying Drupal instance, and it can talk to Drupal through Drupal's internal APIs if you're testing a local environment. So it actually connects to Drupal, and you can suddenly start using in your steps, entity query or direct database connections. There's a Drush driver, and then there's what's called a black box driver, which is useful for remote sites. So they have different levels of integration, but to answer your original question, once you've got Drupal driver, you can do core type things like create a node. That's probably from Drupal extension, maybe. So you'll end up with Drupal extension and Drupal driver. Let's just leave it at that. There's details around how that works that you probably don't need to start with. There's a really useful extension as well named DrevOps/Behat steps. I'll make sure the link's in the show notes. And that adds a lot of additional traits that you can introduce to your feature context for specific things such as media or views or setting configuration, some of which might be in the core extensions as well. But there's a lot more available once you've got those activated. And that's great for, okay, I want to set up the media in the background, or I want to be able to throw in a table so a table definition is part of that syntax that lets you set up, say, 5 nodes or 5 media items and then test those out. You will probably always be able to write tests that use the admin interface to set things up, but you might find that it's advantageous to start moving those into smaller statements.
Is the documentation pretty good for those?
I don't feel like the documentation is a strength, to be honest. You can get lost, and I actually often tell people joining our team, I'll be like, there's good docs, but actually read the Behat 2.5 docs as well, because I feel like it's better written. I don't know, like that's probably bad advice, like go read the old docs. But honestly, it just makes more sense reading that version, and I should get around to helping improve the current docs. Yeah, I do feel like there are some missing stairs in the documentation and how the heck does this work side of things, and that's probably a bit of a friction or an impediment to more widespread usage.
So you've mentioned several add-ons throughout the show, like the screenshot add-on, the Drupal driver extension. What would you say is kind of your favorite add-on for Behat?
Probably DrevOps Behat steps. If I was going so that's the one that introduces a bunch of additional functionality to Drupal. It's written by Alex, I think his surname is Skripnik, a developer from Australia. There are a couple of others as well. So Alex also has DrevOps/Behat screenshot, I think it's called. And another one that really is a real boon is, I don't know the extension name, it'll be in the show notes, but it's a Mailhog extension. So that provides you the ability to capture, so you can bring up a Mailhog system to capture all the outgoing emails from Drupal, or from this system under test actually. So it would capture other emails as well. And then you can include in your step definition, then I click on reset password, and then I click on the first link in my inbox, and then I'm logged in. That's probably not valid Behat what I'm saying out loud, but you get the idea. You can, with the Mailhog extension, you can say, then I should have an email from this person with the subject, or from this account with the subject. And that's really cool because it closes a big loop in testing of user interactions with the site. Otherwise, you've kind of got this area that you can't see or can't be confident of, that posting a message in a forum triggers a notification email. And we've even we've written tests around what do you call it when you get like 3 updates a day or something, the batching thing that some forums do.
Right,
digesting.
Yes.
Thank you. So that was something I had to tackle a year or two back with group module and a site migration for a learning community. And so I guess that might be an example of where you might have to write some custom stuff as well, because in order to test digesting, you need to trigger the digesting process and possibly trigger enough emails going out to kick that off, or change the digesting configuration so that it's going to happen after the second email, even though the standard would be 20. So sometimes you might change the parameters to test the thing you care about, which is that digesting happens after a certain number, rather than post 20 comments just to meet an arbitrary number, which is a configurable variable anyway. So I'm always looking for those opportunities to move, this list of things like PNG, GIF, JPG. Can that be configuration? And is there a reason that it's just been put in as an array somewhere? Can we move it to configuration? So then it becomes something that you can address during a test and know that there's an array, but we don't need to care about what the value of the array is, and it can be changed in order to better test it.
This conversation's reminding me that test could also be set up to check to make sure you only got one email, I would imagine. Back in the day, a friend of mine managed to send a couple 100,000 emails to some people from a dev server.
Who hasn't sent a few 100,000 emails while they were
not
in
a big
the
deal.
city?
Every so often you get that email like, don't pay attention to that email you just got. But anyway.
Yeah.
Well, so to kind of start wrapping stuff up, you mentioned when you have new people coming on the team that you're introducing to Behat, kind of pointing them towards the 2.5 documentation, right? Do you have any other tips for folks new to Behat on how to get started?
I feel like I'm gonna get myself in trouble with that statement somewhere down the line, but but that's okay. We'll let it stand.
On the record now. Yep.
Yeah, it's on the record, and so now it's my job to improve the situation, right? Yeah, it really is worth getting your head around the documentation generally to understand what's happening. It really is worth getting your code editing environment able to support your use of this new language as you do for other, for your for PHP generally or for JavaScript, because those are the tools that support you to do your job, and so you can focus on just doing the job rather than WTFing about the
syntax.
Syntax, and I wonder if this is a valid definition. We do also, so you can do a Behat-DL, which will spit out all of the available step definitions, and then we throw that in a wiki, which I guarantee is well outdated by now. But it gives people a thing that they can control if their way through instead of starting to type things to see what happens. You can, if you write an invalid step definition, so if I wrote, then I turn the lights on, and Behat guaranteed doesn't know that. Oh, let's pick one for you. So then I visit talkingdrupal.com and I click on the first episode, and I click play on the media player. So that last one, and I click play on the media player, Behat doesn't know yet. And what it will do is it'll say, this step definition is missing. Here's a block of code that has the annotation at the start, and then, pretty much an empty function. And you can copy that into your feature context file and, throw in the minc or the required steps to identify that you've got a div with .media player, and inside that there's an anchor with .media player play in the HTML, and click play. I don't know how you would test that from there. I don't think there's an audio driver for Behat, but that will give you the tool supports you to start writing custom step definitions, but do, and same general advice with Drupal, look for whether there's an existing extension that supports this functionality rather than writing custom code, because if you can not write some lines of code, that's a really good choice in life.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we all can agree with that. If that's one thing you take away from this, don't write custom code. With that, Chris, thank you for joining us. It's been a very enlightening conversation and very informative as well. Awesome. It's been fun. Thank you.
And for our listeners, do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or via email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack and the Talking Drupal channel. And if you're interested in show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and Chad's Book Corner, you can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter. You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo. And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. All right. Well, we've reached the end of our show. If, Chris, people wanted to reach out to you and learn more or ask questions about Behat, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Drupal Slack is great. I'm on Twitter as well. My handle on Drupal.org and everywhere is a little bit of a mouthful. It's Zurazamon, starts with an X and has a Z in it. And I guess it'll be in the show notes to save me spelling it out. We will ensure that is in the show notes. Although in Slack, you might be able to type Chris and have it show up. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That works too. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Abby, what about you? Yes, also on Drupal Slack at ABOWMAN. Easier to spell. There you go. Nick. Find me pretty much everywhere at Nixman, NICXVAN. And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And if you're interested in learning about EPAM, you can find out about us at EPAM.com. If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.